Some brands are legendary. In every category, someone sets the standard, and some companies create raving fans. Join Scott Wozniak and Caitlin Johnson of Swaz Consulting as we dig into the tactics and tools behind great organizations. How did the legends do it? And how can you become a legendary brand too?
All right, Scott. So today I'm excited because we're going to get into the weeds around how to interview for competence. And we've been doing this mini series on the 3 C's for hiring. So we've got chemistry, character, and competence. And so we're wrapping up with competence. So in this episode, we're going to go into how do you look for it effectively? How do you interview for the competence that you need for your role?
Yeah, it's critical because like all these, if there's one thread through this little mini series is don't guess and don't assume. And the big mistake we see is the guy, like I'm going with my gut. I had a really good feeling about his competence. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Mm-hmm.
know, a test for it, tactically assess this. Here's what I'm looking for, right? We talked about that last time. Now, here's
Mm-hmm.
the specific thing I'm doing to test to see, does she have that ability? Can she pull this off? And so we'll start with an obvious one, but it is sadly not as common as it ought to be. And that is when you're in the interview process, they give you a resume. The resume says, like, here's my role. And if it's a good resume, it'll even have bullet points that say, here's what I accomplished in that role.
Mm-hmm.
Launched
Right.
this big project, increased sales by this much, solved this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then don't just be like, great, that sounds like, tell me more about, no, ask historical based specific questions to say, tell me how. You launched that project. Tell me how you did that. What was that like? What went
Right.
well? What were the problems in it? How was it different than other projects you've launched? And get them to talk in real detail about how they did it. And the red flag to watch out for is the vague answer. Like, we just really worked hard at the project and we gave it our best shot and we did really good work.
Right.
And what do you know? We
Yeah.
got great results. Like, no.
Yeah, no, you need specifics around it. So what I'm hearing is instead of, hey, tell me more about your role at XYZ company that you held this position on. Just instead of the generic, tell me about this role, it's more of, talk to me about how you executed on bullet point number 3.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
you might not use that language, right? But you would say, okay, on your resume, I see that you have this bullet here. Tell me more about how you went about that.
Yes. And then it's like follow-up question, follow-up question, follow-up question, where you just like double click on that, double click on that,
Mm-hmm.
on that. Like, let's get into this. Okay, well, who else was on the project team? And tell me what they contributed versus what you contributed. And do you have different personalities there? And how did you manage that? And okay, well, or if it's sales, like, well, what were the other sales guys? What were you doing differently than the other salespeople to get those results? And how did you measure those results? And what was it, the change in leads or was it the
Uh-huh.
closing rate? And like, give me the details. What was your scorecard like? And if they can be like, oh yeah, so the first method was we would do a pre-call and then I realized that pre-call, actually we needed 2 pre-calls. And so this is the thing. And they can really get into
Yeah.
specifics. You're like, she knows what she's doing on sales. Like this is a real,
Right.
in fact,
Yeah.
I heard it this way. And I've started using this now. If you want to know if you have real high level competence in the role, this might be a slight overstatement, but maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
This guy said, hey, if they're not teaching you in the interview more about the role than you knew, then they're probably not the level of competence you're looking for. Now,
Oh,
that assumes
interesting.
you don't do the job. Maybe you're hiring somebody
Yeah.
for like
Hmm.
years, right? But if
Right.
this is a CEO talking to other CEOs, and he's like, you want to bring in a head of sales, or you want to bring a head of customer success, or finance, or pick your zone, or HR. If they don't know more about HR than you do, and they're literally teaching you stuff in the role, and they're like, listen, here's how you measure employee engagement. Here's how you know if your team's, these are the early warning signs. Do you guys have a scorecard for that? And you're like, no, we don't. And they're like, well, that would be one of the things I would do if you hired me is I'd start this new metric to track how much are they do? Like I'll make some vacation days. If they don't take enough vacation days, that could actually be a
Mm-hmm.
problem. And so we need to track who's not had a vacation in the last 6 months. And you're like, that's
Mm-hmm.
a very interesting way of thinking about my staff. If you're not
Yeah.
that level of specific, creative, strategic ideas in the interview process about their job,
Hmm. Hmm.
maybe they don't have the competence. Now, keep this in mind. If that's what they're saying and you're hiring like your entry level person, that might be overcompetent. Like
Yes.
you got yourself a Caitlin on your hands, and
Right.
for
Right.
that again. So it's an exaggeration, perhaps, but that's a good anchor point to say
Yeah.
we're not just looking for, oh, we had good project meetings. Like, teach me how you did this and see
Hmm.
passion and excellence and specifics. Ask behavior-based questions and double click and feel like, tell me more about that. And you walk away with a page of notes on like, that's cool project approach. I really like the way
Yeah.
you think about that.
It's interesting. I'm hearing something different as you're speaking. And it's okay. So in interviews, yes, use behavioral questions. But I feel like in the organizations I've worked for, there have been interview guides and there are canned behavioral questions of tell me a time when blah, 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 right? But what I like what you're saying is that you're looking at the data they're providing you, their resume,
Yeah.
and you're adapting your behavioral questions to say, talk to me more about your experience in this past role you had and this particular bullet point that you're sharing that you were able to accomplish. What I'm also hearing, Scott, is a difference in tone in the sense of prove to me why you are the right person for this job because I have these canned behavioral questions versus I'm so curious about your past role. Can you tell me more about what went in there? And in that tone difference that I just said, imagine how a candidate will feel as they're now having a conversation with you of like, oh my gosh, yeah, let me fluff my feathers and tell you about that role and that bullet point that I'm proud about versus, holy moly, let me think about a behavioral example for your question.
It's more fun on both sides of the equation. I don't think I've ever framed it exactly how you framed it, but I love that.
Yeah.
Not testing in the sense of I'm the like the boss sitting up at the high desk, leaning over, looking down at you. It's the
Mm-hmm.
curiosity of like a
Yes.
scientist going, "Ooh, explain to me
Yeah.
more about how that
Yes.
works." Um,
Yes.
and you literally can learn in your interviews, and they're feeling like, oh, I get a chance to talk about things I love and things I'm good at.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if they're not good at it or they don't love it, that will also be clear, right? There'll be the Caitlins who light up and like unload all their cool ideas on you. And
Yes.
there'll be the not Caitlins
Yeah.
who are like, well, I mean, you just do the job and like,
Yeah,
okay,
the job was fine, sure. Yeah. But I think it's super telling. And like I said, it wasn't until I heard you talk that I was like, oh my goodness, there is a tonal difference
yeah.
in being inquisitive to find out about the competence level of someone versus being like hard nosed on the behavioral questions.
Yeah. And it's a great way to build an early connection and get them to can open up and just, I mean, I don't know, I just have more fun with that approach as well.
Yes.
So listen, it's not necessarily a totally new tactic. It's what you ask and how you ask it.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's a whole other option here, right? So like start with your questions, get detailed, get curious, find out what's going on. But man, at some level, especially the higher level positions, the more substantial like role they're going to play, and there's going to be a lot riding on this. Don't even take their word for it. I've seen a lot of organizations actually test their competence in sense of saying, "Show me. Don't tell me about it.
Yes.
Let's actually do it. Do it with me right now." So um, I'll give you an extreme example. So my role at Chick-fil-A was a pretty high level role. It was not an entry level space, right? I was going to work across the
Mhm.
company and do all this leadership and strategy. And it was great. And a part of that job was I'm going to have to communicate a lot and talk and present and do training. And so, because if you remember, my job was, listener, I know Caitlin, you know this, but like I went 50% of the time, traveled the world, learned all these cool stuff, and the other 50% come back and turn it into an upgrade program.
Mm-hmm.
Key moment in that process is I would come back and I'd say, okay, I spent the last 9 months getting 5 certifications, going to 3 conferences, working with 2 companies here, and then I would have to do a big presentation to the executive team. Here's what I found. Here's the
Sure.
model. Here's the arrangement. I'm synthesizing all this stuff and I would present that. And then if they liked it, I would often have to turn that into like presentations for the departments or the teams. And so I do a lot of key communication. So you could talk about my communication skills all day long. And I
Mm-hmm.
could and did geek out
Mm-hmm.
about like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
here's how I like to prepare my presentations. Um,
Right.
you know what they did? Next level, as they said, great,
Yeah.
we want to see one.
Yeah.
And so
Show me.
one of my
Mm-hmm.
17 interviews that I did,
Which
this is
is crazy. It
not
really
an exaggeration.
is.
Uh,
And
one of
that's why
them,
you prefaced this is an extreme
that's
example.
exactly right. Not recommended for everybody.
Right.
But they literally had me come in and give an hour-long presentation. They said, pick any topic you want.
Yeah.
There was a core hiring crew and they brought in a few others. There was about 10 people in the room. And they said, we're looking at Scott for this role. Scott, go.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so for a big name company, like you might be able to do
Yeah,
that.
I led, and then an hour later, they said thanks, and they stayed around and they debriefed and talked about it. And good, obviously, I did well enough that I moved on to the
Yeah.
next.
Yeah. Because that was interview number 7.
Yeah, yes, it was not early. Right, it was about halfway through. Okay, so maybe you don't do that for every candidate. Let me get a little more realistic. Okay, what would that look like in other roles? Hey, join a strategy meeting or jump on a sales call or
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to see you do this coding piece. Now, coding's a really interesting world for this. More and more, if you want to get a development job, you don't go interview and say, hey, I think I can and I'm good at this. There's
Mm-hmm.
a site called GitHub where you can go do
Mm-hmm.
pro bono open source coding and create stuff. And you create an account and it tracks what contributions you made to what projects, and the community rates the quality of the project and the quality of the individual contributions. And so you can
Mm-hmm.
literally go look up, hey, Caitlin the coder, and here's what she's actually done. Like, forget telling me about your skills. I'm going to go look at things you've actually built and
Got
say,
like a portfolio of
yeah,
your of what you've
yes,
created.
like an artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My daughter had to do this to get in her animation program. It's an elite program. You can't just want to do it. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
a good enough artist to get in. And so you can ask a kid, how good of an artist are you? Right? Like this is a competency test. They said,
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm like, I'm not that good. But yeah, great.
right. And sadly, we've all seen American Idol. There are people out there who are certain that they are world class at their craft.
Right,
And
right.
they are not. And so they said, send in a portfolio. It has to have these kind of pieces. Check
Mm-hmm.
all these
Mm-hmm.
boxes. And if you're good enough,
Yeah,
we'll put you in. Don't assume they're all good artists. Actually look at their work.
right.
Now, if you want to go really extreme on this, there's even more extreme than the Chick-fil-A option.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I have totally done this. You hire them in advance of hiring them.
Okay.
So you get a 1099. If
Mm,
international, this may not work. I know, like I've got a bunch of clients in Colombia, South America. Their
mm-hmm.
laws don't allow for casual 1099 gig work. You kind of
Mm-hmm.
have to go full time. But a lot of other countries, Europe does this, US does this. There's some places where you can do a part-time contract and say, hey, why don't you just come help me with this one thing? It's
Mm-hmm.
limited, it's limited in time, it's limited in dollars, it's limited in length. And you say, we'll just do this one project. We'll put on this one event, or we'll solve this one technical problem, or you'll help me deal with this one staff issue. Uh, and then at the end of that, we'll say, hey, do we like that? Do we want to do more?
Mm-hmm.
That's literally how we got our COO here at Swaz. Matt.
Yeah.
Matt was one of our consultants. This is years ago. And Matt and I are having a great time doing projects together. And I'm like, hey, I also have these things kind of at the corporate office level. You want to help me with put this new program together or do the sales process, or I'm standing up
Right.
this CRM at the time and
Just
so
started building from there.
and then like add this. And then Matt, can we add a little more? And at some point I sat down with him. It was like, this works really well, I think. He's like, I think. And I said, why don't we go full time on this and just like
Mm-hmm.
you come in and be my right hand and co-lead this sucker with me. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't a guess. I didn't go from really good interviews to like, let's go full time. I literally like, let's try that.
Trial. Right. You beta
This
tested.
is, yeah, yes. You don't bet the farm all if you can. Now, that doesn't always work for all the positions. There are times
Right.
the person you're interviewing, they need a full-time job. And they're like, I can't do half-time, right? I've got
Yeah. And the
family and
security
life
and
and thank you. Like I can't do
mm-hmm,
that. Uh,
mm-hmm.
Matt was a consultant at the time, and so took a lot of jobs from a lot of people. And so I could
You
say,
could do it.
hey,
Yeah.
let's do this. I get it. Your country might not allow it, but I think you get the concept, right? That is
Right.
the
Yeah.
extreme idea of don't take my word for it, show me. Do
Mm-hmm.
the
So I have a
work.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the whole show me piece, I have a question. So you've shared some really great examples and extreme examples. So if we were to think about like the average organization who is looking for competence and wants to have a show me, like a show and tell type of project, like what would you say would be the right amount of time and effort to go into that? Because I also feel like on the flip side, as a person looking for a job, and I've seen comments from maybe younger generation folks who are like, I know my value. I'm not going to give away, and do your project for free. So like there's this balance of where the person you're interviewing feels like you might be taking advantage of their skills and getting a free implementation plan, because I know I was interviewing for an organization for a learning and development program. And they're like, we have this idea of a training program as part of your interview process. Can you build out the implementation plan? And I did remember thinking, like, I hope this works. And they're not just trying to use my experience to their benefit and then say thanks, but no thanks.
Right.
So what have you seen out there on like the types of projects that are appropriate? Let's give it that term.
Good. So I'm going to make up some stuff. That's a really good question. And I have not formally arranged this, but I'm going to think out loud. And some initial ideas popped up as I'm thinking here. So first, I would say what I think's appropriate is to ask me to spend a little like live time. Now, this doesn't work for all roles, but like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I would say it more appropriate in your scenario is join our team meeting. We're going to be talking
Mm,
about our implementation plan. We would like for you to just participate in that meeting and contribute. And we'd love to hear
mm,
your thoughts. And see, what they were asking you to do was go on your own time and make a new work product and then bring that
right.
work product back to them. And that starts to feel like how much time and effort am I putting in this? And I'm creating something new for you, or whereas, like, just give me some of your time. Like, again, it's
Mm-hmm.
another interview. Just come spend some time with us, and we want to see what it's like to have you a part of the implementation planning meeting. And then you didn't spend hours wrestling through making a new thing for,
Pre-work.
hey,
Right.
it's
Yeah. Because
fun work.
I was worried about the graphics and the
Ah,
visual and
yes.
like, is this what they were looking for?
Right. And
Yeah.
okay. So now let's say you want to do that. I would say
Mm-hmm.
from a highly honoring integrity standpoint, my ideal would be if I'm going to ask somebody to make a new work product for me, that's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, hire them for that. Now, maybe it's not, we want to do a 3 month project. Maybe it's Caitlin, we'll give you $500, $250. I don't know, depending on the level of the thing, a small amount of money
Mm-hmm.
to say, hey, we may not use it, but we think you're far enough down the road. We'd be interested in seeing your implementation plan. Can we give you
Hmm.
$350 and you bring a plan back to us? And we want these parameters, and you do a little mini project. That to
That's
me
really clever.
really
Yeah.
respectful. Like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm serious, I'm interested, and I know you're about to do work for us. What do you think?
Yeah. That's really clever. And one of the reasons I'm thinking it's clever is because, again, I'm thinking about another interview where they wanted me to present for an hour to a panel. And again, there I needed to present, a product, so to speak, of what my plan and recommendation would be, which is a lot of work. But they flew me up, they put me in a hotel, they paid for my food, like all of that money, and I didn't get the job.
Ah,
So all of that money, but I didn't get anything in return for that entire day and a half
yeah.
that I needed to invest to go travel to see them and the time to put that product together. But if you were to say, we'll pay you $250 or whatever the case may be to put this together, and then you could do it virtually, they wanted to see me face to face. I was getting further along in the interview process, and I respect that. But yeah, that's interesting. I would have
This can get
felt a
expensive,
lot better.
right? And you're
Mm-hmm,
thinking,
mm-hmm.
oh man, Scott, you're making us spend a lot of time and now spending money and like this isn't, it's not worth it. And let me tell you what's more expensive than this. Not getting the right fit for the role. So think carefully. I would maybe not all the roles are the kind of thing you would pay them to do work product for you or even spend a whole day, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain level where it's like, oh, it's worth a lot of money to the company if we do this right. How much value is Caitlin going to provide for us? Yeah, we should. What's worse than not investing too much and spending like maybe five candidates and we have to pay them all and we only want one of the implementation plans? You know what's worse than that? Hiring somebody who can't do a good implementation plan and then your big company rollout fails because you don't have a good implementation plan.
Yes.
This is the fundamental message we're talking about in this whole mini series is if you don't put meaningful time, effort, and maybe even money into your hiring process, it will cost you way more down the road than trying to get as cheap and basic as you can out of this deal. Now let's get
Mm-hmm.
a middle of the road. If you can't fly people around the country, you're a small business, you're figuring this out. We have done things like, hey, hire them to come work in the business. So Chick-fil-A or other local restaurants or yeah, service-oriented groups have said, hey, just come do a half day with me and we'll pay you the regular rate. I'll get a little work out of you and we'll see what you get to see what it's like and we'll get to see what it's like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or there's some groups that put together like a simulation day. If you're larger and you got little bunch of candidates coming in, you pull like 20 people in together and you do a bunch of interviews, but then you put them in a scenario and you say, hey, let's see how you handle this scenario. There's some organizations that'll do like a group project of the candidates, and you'll have like 6 to 8 candidates work on a group project together, and you look and see how you're evaluating all 8 people at once. And in one afternoon, you're getting to see how do they actually work together with each other. And it's
Right.
the guy who won't stop talking, who's like, maybe he's really good at an interview, but he doesn't play well with a team member. And the gal
Mm.
who's like, do you see how she set those other two up for success and gave them her ideas? We should hire that one. And so there's a lot of ways to test and get a live experience with them and see what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
But go for it. I'll give you one last thing as we kind of talk about this that is underutilized when you're doing a competency test, and that is the reference check.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I completely
Huge
forgot about that
competency.
right now.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
often seen as a bonus in the process for people. I think it might
Or
be,
like an afterthought. Like, you
yes.
kind of offer the role, but then you're like, oh, wait, real quick, let's do the reference checks.
Now, the mistake is if you just take the surface references, well, listen, they're not an idiot. They're not going to put somebody on there who doesn't, who like, they were like, Caitlin, tell him I'm
Yeah.
awesome, right?
Right. Yeah.
Call you
Like
and you're like,
your
what's
best friends. You're right.
thank you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your mother, your
Yeah.
grandmother, right? Your best friend who
The
you
sister
hired.
with a different last name.
Oh, because they're clever is exactly right. Like she got married, they won't know.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, no. But if you are willing to have a serious conversation with them, you'll get the same exact kind of stuff, just like the interview question. Like, if Caitlin says she worked with you at this company, and it says that she did some of these projects. Were you a part of that project with her? Can you tell me
Mm-hmm.
about this piece with her? What was it like? What was she best at? And now you don't have to like try to do gotchas and be like, tell me what
Mm.
Caitlin's worst at and what is it? Come on, she's so bad. Tell me what the prop. You can just push for specifics. And if Caitlin's really good, they will be able to list 5 real specific ways they loved working with you. And if she's not, they'd be like, she's great. And
Yeah.
on that team and I didn't really see it, but I heard good things. Like, no, no.
Yeah. It'd be really generic.
If
Mm-hmm.
they're legitimately competent, you will get lots of detailed feedback on all the ways that person is awesome. Now, in the US right now, legally, they are not required to do this. And there'll be some organizations that will have a policy that say, we will only confirm that Scott worked at this organization from this date to
Hire date. Right.
we'll say
Exactly.
nothing
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I was terrible at the job, but it's not a good sign if every single one of your references can only confirm my employment dates. I'm
Mm.
not saying drop the candidate on that data point alone. I am saying that's a
Yeah.
yellow flag. Maybe ask for more references who are willing to actually talk.
Hmm.
References are a big deal, a real
Yeah.
deal.
What would you recommend on that? Because I'm thinking about a couple large organizations I worked for, and that was their stance, right? You call a 1-800 number, and the reference check is hire date, end date, and maybe job title, maybe.
Mhm.
Well, I guess you could call a colleague that you worked for. So instead of maybe the HR headquarters.
It's not a deal breaker for me, but what I do is
Hmm.
I would go back to the candidate and say, hey, is there anyone else? We weren't able to actually talk to these people. Is there
Hmm.
anyone else who could get specific with us and do this? And they might say, make this up. I've only ever worked at that large organization. I did the last 12 years there. I rose through the ranks, and I'm sorry,
Hmm.
that's the company's policy and they're really strict on it. Then I'll say, okay, if the rest of the things have gone well, you've been really specific in your interviews. This is the kind of scenario where, like, maybe we want to see a little work product from you. Let's do a test run,
Okay.
right?
Sure.
Might have to
Yeah.
compensate a little. It doesn't mean you're out, but most of the time I can say, hey, I didn't get to talk to anybody. Is there any other colleague or anyone else you've worked with that we could say, hey, what's it like? And you just try, at least give it one more try to find somebody you can have an honest conversation with.
Hmm.
Not essential, deal breaker, but ooh, I get a lot of really good stuff from reference checks. Now, in your
Definitely.
case, by the way, hiring you,
Yeah.
ironically, we had done the reference check before because who connected us was a mutual friend who gave
That's
me
right.
all sorts of specific things. And then I called him afterwards and he's like, oh man, yeah, Caitlin's la 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 la. And
Yeah.
so we started with a reference check, and then
Good point.
I was doing a curious get to know you conversation. And what do you know, in my curiosity, you are passionately detailed, spelling out all the stuff you did and how you did it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
girl's competent. Maybe we should
Yeah.
talk and
Thanks,
do
Scott.
a
Yeah.
test. So
Hmm.
that's how we started, was with a
Hmm.
high level of competence confidence, because a reference check came in the door. And then in our get to know you conversation, you were spelling out all the cool stuff you were doing. And I think we were even like sharing the screen and showing each other examples. It's like, oh,
Right. Yeah.
okay. So we knew you
Yeah.
were competent. And the question then was, we got to do character chemistry tests. I need her to meet two or three other people on the team. Uh,
Hmm.
let's do a project together. Like,
Yeah. Actually, yeah. I guess you could probably say like 1099. I'm still at 1099, but that's also by choice with
right.
other things that I'm
That
creating
is
and building.
because
Yeah.
high level competence, part of why we like partnering with someone like you is because someone like you with this level, who do I want to be co-host with a podcast? Someone who's writing her own book and building her own creative stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
by the way, if you don't know, later this year, fingers crossed, Caitlin is on track to release her first book. And so we will have a
Thanks, Scott.
podcast about that when it hits.
Hmm.
And so, yes, you get a super competent person. You got to have something for her to do with all her extra time and energy. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, the role is
Yeah.
designed for someone like you.
Yeah. Right.
But
Exactly.
yes, this is not bonus. This is, I mean, at the end of the day, this is what you're looking for, right? Somebody who can bring high value and take you where you can't go otherwise. Don't
Yes.
assume that they're just because they're a great person, they have the skills you need. I
Yeah.
I know a lot of wonderful people in my life and family who are some of my best friends who shouldn't do certain jobs. Forget that. I shouldn't do certain jobs. And I like myself. And there are jobs you should not put me in. I would
Right. Right.
not thrive in those roles. And you would not, the
Hmm.
mission would not succeed if it counted on me. Just because they're a fun person doesn't mean they're the right fit. Don't
Yeah.
assume test for competence. If you enjoyed this episode, you might want to sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's all new content with the same themes. You can subscribe for free and learn more about how we partner with our clients to build legendary companies at swazconsulting.com. That's www.swozconsulting.com. And if you want to get access to the actual tools and techniques that we use with our elite consulting clients, check out our online program at legendarybrandsacademy.com. That's www.legendarybrandsacademy.com. competence.com. Greatness is possible. You just have to build the right engine.